Not all attributes are created equal on Football Manager, but for every position, there are a couple that are highlighted that are particularly important. And I'm going to go through every position and tell you which one of those highlighted attributes doesn't really matter that much. We start with goalkeepers, where we see all of these attributes highlighted in green. Those are the most important attributes. The blue ones are like also would be cool if you had them. Aerial reach, command of area, communication, handling, kicking, reflexes, concentration, positioning, and agility. That's more than most positions we're going to cover. But the least important one out of all of these, in my opinion, by far, is communication. You will see animations in Football Manager where there is a miscommunication between the goalkeeper and the defender. This is something that is affected by a myriad of different things, from your team cohesion to your locker room atmosphere to the mental abilities of the other player involved in the miscommunication. It is not an attribute like aerial reach or concentration or positioning that is solely dependent on what's happening with the goalkeeper. You add in the fact that oftentimes you're signing a goalkeeper that maybe doesn't speak the language, in which case it's going to take a while for him to be able to speak the language and communicate effectively with his teammates anyways. That's handled through the Football Manager adaptability system, which is a hidden attribute. Yeah, we're not talking about those today, but they exist. The other highlighted attributes are basic shot stopping and box controlling things that you need to just be a good, effective goalkeeper. While communication, I'm surprised that it's in the green category. Now, for the center backs, the big guys, the tough guys, the manliest men. Center backs, they don't have a lot of highlighted attributes to begin with. There's, of course, in the physical category, jumping reach and strength, but you know it's not going to be either of those. You need to be good aerially or strength-wise. If you're not, you better be really damn good at everything else. In the mental category, we have aggression, bravery, decisions, and positioning. And then in the technical category, we have heading and tackling. And given the fact that this guy is a starting player on my current Football Manager save on Twitch, the answer is fairly obvious. It's heading. It is not nearly as important as the other attributes that are highlighted on this list. It's just not. Because the honest truth is, if I've got a guy like Hollandinho, he's a great wonder kid 19-year-old we're managing in Brazil. That's how this works. He's got 18 jumping reach. He's 200 centimeters tall, right? He's huge. He's going to win all the headers. I'd rather him win all the headers and then be inaccurate with where he puts them than let the other team win the headers. Heading would be nice to have. Every attribute in the game, you wish it could be at 20, but it's not. So what's the one that you can allow your player to be a little worse at, and it doesn't really matter that much? And when it comes to center backs, if you're following the highlights here, it's heading. Because Hollandinho already has a goal this season. And his defensive heading, we have not had one giant mistake all year where he's accidentally headed them through on goal, which is a lot more likely to happen if the other guy wins the header. Now it's on to fullbacks. And for fullback purposes, there's obviously a couple of very different roles here. We're just going to go with kind of your classic fullback on support, maybe a fullback on attack, maybe a wingback on defend, right? Highlight a couple of different sets of attributes. But my answer to this one is always clear. And it is one that is going to surprise a lot of people. I don't care if it's not going to be anything in the physicals. Balance is highlighted on some of these roles as green too. Still important. Have to be able to stay on your feet in front of very tricky wingers, right? Some of this nonsense. Gotta stay loose. The mental attributes that are typically highlighted, like work rate, for example, unbelievably important. Things like positioning and teamwork, when you got a player that's playing on the back line, those are both very important too. The answer is instead tackling. Tackling is the least important highlighted attribute at the fullback position. Hold on. It would be great if your fullback would be able to go up and tackle the opposition player, but modern fullbacks, they're just built to be more offensive players than defensive players, especially the higher you go up in Football Manager, you're going to end up with a lot less Azpilicuetas and a lot more, well, guys like Lucas Suarez. And I'm not saying that's just an excuse to put up with bad tackling. You can get away from it. Well, somebody that's good at tackling definitely can't do all the things Lucas Suarez can do going forward with the ball in my particular system. If you have somebody that's bad at tackling, just tell them to stay on their feet. It's a personal player instruction. You can just go to tactics, player, ease off tackles. So instead of trying to dive in and win the ball, which just isn't going to be a successful thing most most of the time, you'll have a lot of people that manage in real life and play Football Manager at a high level tell their fullbacks to ease off tackles. This is one of the positions with the highest variety in types of players you can have. So use your brain here. Don't just mindlessly listen to me. You can be in a situation where you do have a Wan-Bissaka, and that can be very valuable, and you don't want to disregard them because tackling's bad in all instances. But if a fullback's tackling is bad, let's say, and you want to play them as a wingback on defend, like in this position, but they're good in all of the other highlighted attributes, well, they're gonna be a good wingback on defend. They just are. Much more so than if any of these other attributes were quite bad. The fullback doesn't need to be able to lunge in and take the ball away from a winger. It's just a bonus. Oh, how times have changed. Defensive midfield, another position where there's a couple of varieties of players, but for this purpose, we are going to talk about just a defensive midfielder. No segundo volante woke nonsense. We'll get to those freaks later. Now, my defensive midfielder in my current FM saves a guy named Skelly Alvaro. He is a freak. He's 6'8", 202 centimeters, and has 18 out of 20 jumping reach. But that is what I like to call the extra gravy. That's the bonus, right? Because he still needs to be able to do the things that a defensive midfielder needs to do. And with basic defensive midfielders, physical attributes are not that important, right? There is not a single physical attribute here. If you do go for somebody like a ball-winning midfielder, it's going to throw in stamina and ability to cover ground, but that's when you're asking that defensive midfielder to go out and pressure the opponent a lot more. It is a primarily mental position, with anticipation, concentration, positioning, and teamwork being the dominant attributes. And of course, the ability to tackle. And unlike fullbacks, I'm not going to say tackling again, obviously. This guy in this position needs to be able to get stuck in and take the ball off people. But out of the mental attributes, the least important for a defensive midfielder is concentration. This was a harder one for me to pick. I was a little more uncomfortable with this selection, but let me show you what I'm talking about. This is a match between us and Corinthians. We're doing pretty well. We managed to get ourselves all the way from the third division to the top division. And against Corinthians, this is Skelly Alvaro. And he has a little lapse in judgment, and he's not really paying attention, and he's not able to anticipate where this pass is going. But fortunately for Skelly Alvaro, there is a second line, right? There's the set of defenders behind him where concentration is very important, because a lapse in judgment from these guys means these guys are in on goal. And that would be, obviously, a bad thing. But for somebody like Skelly Alvaro, the ability to actually make the tackle, position yourself properly, work within the unit of your team, and anticipate situations is more important than the occasional lapse in judgment. Because he needs to be able to do all those other things at a higher level, so that sometimes Skelly Alvaro can shut a play down without it ever getting to the back line, and be able to work within the unit of the team when the team is in possession of the ball. I am surprised that certain things like composure and decisions aren't green on a defensive midfielder. This feels like, particularly in the defensive midfielder role, that it's more the defensive focused attributes that are highlighted as green here. But concentration is not nearly as important for a defensive midfielder as it is for the guys on the back line. As long as they can do the other stuff at a higher level to affect the game when they are paying attention, that's way more important, because their lapse of concentration is just not going to kill you as much. But now we move up to the midfield, and we're going to do two different types of central midfield players. First, there's the box-to-box type of player, right? That is, of course, a role in Football Manager, the box-to-box midfielder that values stamina, off-the-ball teamwork, work rate, passing, and tackling. But this is the type of player that you want to be well-rounded. I think the highlighted attributes are less important on box-to-box midfielder than basically any other role in the game. You just want this person to be able to do a job, fill some space, be capable of doing everything at an okay level instead of anything at an exceptional level. So the green attribute that you don't have to pay attention to on your space-eating kind of center mid on support box-to-box midfielder types is teamwork. So I'll read teamwork for you. This attribute reflects how the player can follow tactical instructions while working for and alongside his teammates. One, teamwork is obviously very important when a player is on the ball, because your tactical instructions are going to dictate to whom that ball is going to be played, what tempo, what directness, all those sorts of things. Well, this player's not going to be on the ball as much, and they also have an incredibly fluid role, which means adherence to set tactical principles is not necessarily nearly as important as a midfielder that's just floating all over the place trying to occupy space defensively and offensively. But it could not be more different for the other type of central midfield player, both center and attacking, which would be your playmaker, your deep-lying playmaker, your roaming playmaker, your segundo volante, your regista, your advanced playmaker. Trequartista, I believe, also falls into this category. This player really needs teamwork, but there's another attribute that is highlighted here that's just not as important as the others, because, I mean, that's the point of the video. If there wasn't, then we wouldn't be here making this video, would we? And it's It's not off the ball, which may surprise you, but as somebody that has played a truly unholy amount of hours in this game, having a good off the ball playmaker is fantastically important. Positioning affects defense, off the ball affects offense in terms of player movement. Your playmaker is the primary outlet. There is a gravity that pulls the ball towards your playmaker. And the higher their off the ball is, the better they're going to be able to move around to get themselves open and in a better position to do the thing they're there to do, playmake. Obviously, passing, first touch, vision, teamwork, and decision making are all crucially important. And so is composure. Decision making and composure go hand in hand. Decision making is the ability to make the right decisions, and composure is the consistency with which you make those right decisions under pressure, at least in an offensive sense. And in a defensive sense, it affects your confidence in challenges and weird things like that. But that's not important for these guys. Now, I'm going to go in a weird direction. I'm going with technique. This might be the most disagreed with one by people that play a lot of Football Manager that I put on this entire list. But I'm going to need you to hear me out on this real quick. Technique is the refinedness of a player's game. And obviously, naturally, a lot of playmakers are going to have very high technique. You're not going to run into a lot of playmakers, particularly at the higher levels of the game, that have lower technique. It does mention when you read the actual description of technique, and you'll notice this as you play the game, it's important for being able to pull off more visually impressive and more technically difficult skills, like a particularly audacious pass or a particularly good cross, or you'll also notice it for shots and things like volleys and stuff. But most of the time, you're not doing that. You're just playing a nice straight pass into an open man, a fairly direct through ball, a sideways pass to set up a winger to make a run. There are great, reliable playmakers out there that don't have particularly high technique, and they do all of the little things right. That's the guy you need at playmaker, and if they can bring a little sauce to it, that's the gravy. But it's not, the meat and potatoes. Now we head to the wings, and I am once again going to create two separate archetypes for you because the answers are going to be very different. We're going to start with wingers that you want to cut inside. These are your inside forwards, your inverted wingers. And with these guys, I actually have two different answers because there's two different types of players that you want doing this. There are the guys that you want to be your primary goal-scoring threat, in which case finishing is important. And they're the guys that aren't a primary goal-scoring threat. They're an inside forward, an inverted winger, a Romdoid, or whatever that is there to help facilitate and open up space. And on those particular players, finishing is the one that's highlighted that you just don't need. Finishing is overblown in its importance anyways. With things like composure, dribbling, first touch, and of course technique as well, you're able to score a lot of goals by getting yourself in the right position and being able to handle it. Natural finishing is great, but being world-class in other areas like your athleticism or your size or your intelligence and work rate, those are more important than just being a great finisher. Finishing does almost nothing by itself. It's a very dependent attribute. And so if you have somebody that is not expected to be a primary goal scorer as an inside cutting winger, you don't need finishing. Every other green attribute on these inside forwards is important for being able to open up a team. But let's say you do want this inside forward, this inverted winger, to be a primary goal threat, in which you at least want them to have decent finishing. The least important attribute is anticipation. Offensively speaking, anticipation is a pretty ball-dependent attribute. If you have somebody that is looking to score goals, they are not going to be distributing this ball to other people. They are either going to be on the receiving end of your offensive moves, putting them away at the back post, picking it up at the edge of the 18 and attacking the goal, or they're going to pick the ball up a little deeper and they're going to go on long, majestic runs with their athleticism, with their dribbling and their flair, and get themselves into goal-scoring positions that you hope they can take advantage of. In either case, anticipation just isn't overly important relative to a lot of other attributes on the board when it comes to being able to do that. But what about your classic wingers? A very different role than the types of wingers that look to cut the ball inside. They pick the ball up near the touchline, and maybe sometimes you have them cut inside with the ball, but the answer is actually the same as one before. Technique. I don't know why it's highlighted on out-and-out wingers, but wingers are fairly raw players. They do not need that level of technical refinement to be able to do their job, which generally speaking is pick the ball up, stretch the defense, and maybe get that ball in the box. Acceleration and agility and dribbling all go together to be able to take players on effectively, and crossing's the ability to do that. So technique being put on the same level and above things like work rate and flair is pretty confusing to me, honestly. And it sounds like I'm hating on technique. I love technique. It just doesn't, you don't need it. at these particular positions. But it's finally time for the main show, the strikers. These are the guys that bag the goals. These are the most important guys out there for you. And we're going to do two, again, because I realize there's such a variety of roles. The farther you go up the field, the variety gets even bigger in terms of types of things a player could do. But at forward, you typically have guys that drop off, deeper lying forwards, false nines, that category, and then you have your advanced forwards. We're going to do one of each. For the deeper lying forwards, you have first touch, passing, technique, teamwork, off the ball, decisions, composure. It's not as physically demanding as it is mentally demanding. You're almost like a playmaker playing from that striker position. But there's something that's very unlike a playmaker that I'm going to highlight immediately. Composure. Composure is just not as important as any of the other highlighted attributes for deep lying players. At the striker position, don't mix that up. It is important further back. The issue here is the other stuff is incredibly important. First touch, passing, technique, decisions, off the ball, teamwork, all of that massively important. And this includes technique. You sacrifice technique for composure on playmakers because they're deeper on the field and you want them to make less mistakes. But composure is the weak link on deep lying forwards because they can make a few more mistakes as long as they can do spectacular stuff. If they make a mistake, your team is a lot less exposed. I mean, this is a deep lying forward here. You understand kind of the difference here? I feel like this would be easier to visualize. So here's my team in possession. We're back in a match in my Twitch save. If you look at our shape, we've got our two center backs. Our two fullbacks are pushed up the side a little bit. We've got Skelly Alvaro here, and then here's our midfield line. This is where you're going to find your playmakers. A giveaway from these guys, especially if they're picking the ball up in one of these half spaces, that is significantly worse than somebody like Mortada Saeed dropping into this space. Now, if you have a false nine, they can be dropping all the way down into these other positions. If you have very aggressive midfielders, they can be making their runs off of it. But the trade-off between playing in this area and playing in this area is that you can put up with a few more turnovers to allow for a bit more genius, basically. Because the turnovers, they're just not going to hurt you as much. If you're going, well, I'd just rather have them be great at everything, yeah. So would everybody. Never happens. You never get the perfect player. And then when you do, you post about it on Reddit. You also find a lot of deep lying forwards that have lower composure because it also really helps with goal scoring composure in front of goal. So if you have a forward that is skilled in a lot of these things but has lower composure, you can totally play them as a deep lying forward to get a lot of those skills out of them. And now the final position, the one you've all been waiting for, the advanced forward, the pure number 9, the striker. You've got dribbling, finishing, first touch, technique, composure, off the ball, and acceleration. The least important attribute here is dribbling. And that's how I've signed this guy. He's an advanced forward with excellent first touch and finishing. He's got what I call the Holland build. Now, obviously, the burst is important with the acceleration, the composure, the off the ball, but we've talked about how important those are. Off the ball, particularly being able to create that separation. But being able to dribble, it's gravy. You're there to finish off moves, and maybe you make a run into the channel, but even if your striker does make a run into the channel as a forward player, dribbling is not the most important part of that. It's their speed, their explosiveness, maybe their touch, definitely their off the ball to get into that position. You're not expecting your striker, unless they're a bona fide world-class, superstar or just way better than the league, to take that ball from the corner and go all the way in and score it. You just want them to make that simple play and get back into a goal-scoring position. You can have an incredibly successful striker without dribbling, and that is why this guy won Player of the Month in the league the first 2 months after he signed for me, even though his dribbling at the time was 9. But now it's 10, so that's nice. Because regardless of anything, higher attributes are always better, unless it's eccentricity. Then it's definitely not. I'll see y'all on stream, and if you want to see the most important attributes in these different situations, I have that video too. I'm setting you up from all the different angles to crush this game. Even when the new one comes out, you still got it, unless they're changing all the attributes, in which case, welcome to the future. What is it?